r/Nosleep. Posted by u/GoNavy27. I'm trapped in a city that's been cut off from the world and overrun with monsters, again. The monsters are changing, and so are the rules. Which really fucks up my plan to stay alive. Alright, Eli here. And I promised you the rule updates, so let's get a move on. If there's one fault I actually don't have, it's breaking promises. I already told you about rule number 3, which made me sad when I changed it, because it was one of the more hopeful rules before. Now, it's just depressing. Like everything else in this hellscape. Okay, not everything. Not Zoe, or Mr. Bailey, or Waffles, or Oliver. But most things. You get my point. In the past 6 weeks, I've had to update another 2 rules in addition to number 3. I'm gonna tell you all about those 2 changes and how they came to be today. Ready? Great. Strap in and let's get rolling. First up, rule number 2. Ha. Get it? That's a reference to my very first post ever. I'm clever like that. I didn't realize this one needed an update until a few weeks in, because we were so overrun with monsters that I was mostly just using brute force to kill them whenever possible. No tactics, no specific tools. But then at some point I tried to use my reliable red laser against a Caleb, and it didn't work. That's right, you heard me, it didn't fucking work. I shined that red laser right in its empty eye socket, and the Caleb just kept on coming. A tiny little tendril of smoke drifted upwards, and the Caleb made a little high-pitched noise, but it was nothing like it should have been. Barely any smoke, and barely a screech, and no slowing down. Of course at this point I loudly started cursing and backing the hell up, fumbling in my pockets for the green laser. Usually, red is more effective over green, but I figured maybe they'd adjusted its color sensitivities. It took me an embarrassingly long time to get a hold of the green one. It was somewhere deep in my pocket at this point, since it's never my go-to choice. As I continued to stumble backwards, the Caleb in pursuit and getting closer every second. Finally, my hand closed around the laser, and I pulled it out and shone it in the bastard's eye socket. Any guesses as to the response? That's right, it didn't fucking work. Again. Same outcome as the red laser, a little smoke, and the Caleb made a sound more of annoyance than of pain, and it maybe paused for a split second, but that's it. So, long story short, things weren't looking great for me. The reason I'd gone for the lasers in the first place was because the only weapon I currently had was my original favorite knife. We were in an apartment building, destroying cameras and looking for survivors, and we'd already mowed down an impressive pack of Calebs and Brents. I'd run out of bullets, my pry bar was impaled in a Brent down the hall, I hadn't had time to pull it out before getting mobbed by more monsters. I'd used the few homemade bombs I'd brought by this point. Zoe was in another apartment, and I could hear her actively fighting from here. Not to mention that I was sweaty, exhausted, bleeding, the whole 9 yards. If the lasers had worked to weaken the Caleb eagerly charging at me, I could have finished it off with a knife, no problem. But now I was fucked. So I did what any reasonable person would do, I cursed at the top of my lungs as I turned and sprinted down the hallway. Sometimes running away is the smartest move. In fact, I'm a big supporter of running away. Well, mostly I'm a big supporter of not dying, but if running away is the best way to accomplish that, count me in. I'm gonna be honest, I still thought I wouldn't make it. Calebs are a lot faster than me, after all. And I was on the 4th floor, so jumping out a window wasn't an option. Even if I made it to the stairs at the end of the hall, the Caleb would probably catch me there. My only hope was the fire extinguisher I'd seen on the 3rd floor. My admittedly questionable plan was to make it that far and use the fire extinguisher as a makeshift weapon to bash the Caleb's head in, somehow before it clawed me to pieces. Not promising, but hey, not my worst plan either. I made it to the top of the stairs and started to run down them as fast as I could, which there's no graceful way to do, if you were wondering. At the first landing, halfway between floors, I felt claws pull at the back of my shirt, and when it screeched right behind my head, I almost went deaf. The very real fear that I wasn't going to make it was settling in. I practically jumped down most of that second set of stairs, hoping to put more distance between me and the Caleb, and it almost worked. I reached the landing of the 3rd floor. I could see the fire extinguisher on the other side of the hall, but as I tried to keep my footing from the jump and sprint, pain exploded in my shoulder, and I was pulled to the ground. I landed on my back, my breath ripped away, and the Caleb came with me, its face looming over mine like it wanted to give me the nastiest kiss in the history of the world. Up close, its smell was horrible, the best I can compare it to is rotten meat left out in a driveway for a month. Its claws were also still in my shoulder, piercing clean through. As it shrieked right in my face, it pulled them out, causing me to gasp in pain. And I knew it was over. It had to be. Here I was, on my back, the Caleb on top of me and surely about to slash me to bits or maybe rip my head off, like one had done to Mr. Bailey's owner. It had me pinned, and my shoulder was on fire, the same shoulder attached to the arm that held my knife. I couldn't move it to lift the knife. Believe me, I tried. And no one was even there to see. How anticlimactic can you get? Still, I found the strength to spit in its face. Unfortunately I missed the eye socket. That would have been a nice touch, and say, fuck you. The Caleb didn't like this, it screeched again and reached for my neck. Guess it was going for the beheading option. I started thrashing, hoping to at least make it as hard as possible, as its claws began to puncture the skin on either side of my neck. And then suddenly the world flashed blue, and the Caleb screamed and jumped off me, stumbling back towards the stairwell, its eye smoking as a beam of blue light shone directly into it. I didn't have time to question who was shining it or why. I took the opportunity to struggle to my feet, switch my knife to my other hand, and, being careful to avoid breaking the laser beam, lunged towards the Caleb with the knife. Now it worked, because the Caleb was swinging wildly at its eyes, and smoke was pouring out of the eye hole in earnest. It was almost too easy to slash at its throat and chest, watching the thick purple blood ooze out, until the Caleb finally collapsed, dead. Though I will say the slashes were pretty messy, since I was using my non-dominant hand. Hard to believe that I'd been at this Caleb's mercy just seconds prior. Once it was dead, I stabbed its other eye socket several times and slit its throat fully for good measure. Just to make sure it was dead, because I'm not falling into that stupid trap of think it's dead and turn away only for it to attack you again. Also because fuck that Caleb. Only then did I turn around and see where the laser was coming from. And imagine my pleasant surprise when it was none other than Mr. Bailey, a laser pointer clasped in his teeth. He trotted over, dropped it at my feet, and rubbed against my legs, purring up a storm. I thanked him profusely and hugged him on the stairs for a minute before going to find Zoe. Long story short, I talked to him afterwards, and it turns out that on the first day, when there were still cops around, he saw a Caleb attack a police car, and the blue light seemed to be affecting it, not the red. Of course he couldn't totally tell for sure. Have you seen police lights? And it wasn't as effective as a focus laser right to the eye, but Mr. Bailey took note. After that he stashed a blue laser pointer in my duffel bag, just in case blue was now a better color. I already had blue laser pointers, I have red, green, and blue in my stash. Just mostly red. When he saw the red and then green lasers have very little effect weeks later, he rushed and grabbed the blue one at the bottom of my bag and followed us down to the 3rd floor. He bit down on the button to keep it shining, and, well, he saved my life by doing so. Have I mentioned what a goddamn genius that cat is? Because he really is. He's the smartest and best cat in the entire world. I don't care how great your cat is, I guarantee your cat didn't save your life with a mere second to spare by planning ahead and then killing a monster with a laser. Only Mr. B is that great. It's just a fact. And yes, he did lots of treats when we got home. So, I had to update rule number 2 after that. Turns out I was right about the color sensitivities being changed, but not about the right color. I don't know if it makes them stronger or whether it's just a dick move on the scientists' part to try to catch us unawares. Because it doesn't seem that helpful to change only the color. Probably them being dicks. Rule number 2, always carry a laser pointer. Blue. Red or green won't do shit. Part B, maximum damage occurs when combined with a cat. Ha. Part B is truer than ever now. I don't think that part of the rule will ever change. If you're wondering what Zoe said about that whole encounter, by the way, it was something along the lines of, "Don't you dare get yourself killed when I'm not there. If you're gonna die, it better be right next to me." And then she cuddled the hell out of Mr. Bailey. Oh, and then she told me I looked like a bastardized Frankenstein's monster. You know, the stereotypical version with the bolts in his neck? Yeah, where those would be, I had 2 little puncture wounds, with blood dripping out. So, I mean, she wasn't wrong. And that's rule number 2's update. Nothing too wild. A sneaky trick that almost got me killed, but now that we know, not too traumatic, right? Well, that's not the case with my other story. The other rule I had to change is the scariest change yet. I think you'll see why. This one actually happened only shortly before my last post. I'm just gonna dive in, and you'll realize where this is going. If you've got a brain, that is. It was the middle of the night. I'd been fast asleep when suddenly I was awoken by a scream outside the house. I jolted awake immediately. I think I'm hardwired to notice sounds of distress by now. Also, it was loud. The clock by the bed said it was 2 a.m. Another scream. It sounded like it was coming from very close by. Mr. Bailey leapt onto my shoulder as I hustled across the room, and together we looked out the window. In the street below, illuminated by streetlights, shuffling forward with a pretty severe limp, covered in blood, was Zoe. Now I know what you're thinking, Eli, you dumbass, that's clearly a trap. But I'm not that stupid, okay? Even in my sleep-deprived state, I had that thought too. And I immediately turned to look back at the bed, where Zoe should have been asleep, or possibly sitting up, putting her glasses on, woken by the same screams. But she wasn't there. Her side of the bed was completely empty, her glasses gone. And that's when my heart really started to pound. Even then, I still thought it could have been an MJ. I mean, duh. But then the creature/Zoe outside looked up to the window and saw me. Eli, help me, please. She/it called, her voice breaking in pain. And then she/it raised a hand and flipped me the bird, smiling slightly. No gloves, no fingerless hands, just a good old-fashioned middle finger, like we'd used as a signal so many times in the past. Like she'd given me from a distance the very first time I'd seen her. That's when I knew it had to be her. I wasn't sure what she was doing out at night, or what had happened, but I knew it was her, and I knew she needed me. I practically flew down the stairs, heart racing. We only have 6 other people at our house, and 4 of them were awake, eyes wide. One of them was Oliver, and he was softly crying. Probably he'd been having a nightmare, and waking up to screams couldn't have helped. Normally I'd comfort him, but Zoe was more important. Go help Oliver, I whispered to Mr. Bailey. He meowed and looked at me with an impressive amount of skepticism for a cat. I swear I could see him thinking, are you sure that's a good idea? And you know what, he may have been right. But I couldn't just leave Oliver there to sob. Go help him. Please, I said again. I'll be fine. Mr. Bailey looked at me incredulously again and gave a little shake of his head, but jumped off my shoulder and made his way over to Oliver, who immediately smiled a bit and began stroking Mr. Bailey's fur. Now that he was taken care of, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and headed for the door. I opened it cautiously. It's still never a good idea to go out at night, after all, and I hoped Zoe had a hell of a good reason for being out there, but the darkness was mostly quiet, except for her moans. She saw me immediately and cried out again, holding her arms up as if welcoming me home. Eli. Still glancing around with every step, I hurried over to her, though I didn't embrace her. Gotta be cautious, especially at night, you know? Up close, she looked to be in pretty rough shape. It made my heart ache to see her that way. I wanted to get her inside and help her right away. I had no idea what had done this to her, but the longer we stayed out here, the more likely it was that something else came along and made it worse. Not to mention that all I had was a knife and my sweatpants. If we got attacked, we'd be screwed. Come on, we've got to get inside, I whispered. Can you walk? I can carry you. She seemed to ignore my words. I'm so sorry, Eli, she said. I woke up and heard screaming, and I just had to try and help. But there were more monsters than I thought. It was stupid of me. It kind of was, I agreed, still desperate to get her moving. I could have sworn I was seeing movement in the shadows across the street. But we can talk about it inside. Come on, please. Can you walk? I asked again. I think so, she said, answering my question this time. She took a step and her leg wobbled, sending her to her knee. She chuckled. Aw shit, she said. I wasn't ready. Here, just take my hand and help me up, and if you support me, I can do it. She was reaching out her hand for me to grab, still on her knee. I wanted to pull her to her feet, but my blood had gone cold at her last words. The back of my neck tingled like I was being watched. Alarm bells were going off in my head. What did you say? I asked carefully. She looked at me like I was crazy. You okay, Eli? I said, just take my hand and I can. That's what I thought you said, I interrupted. I gripped my knife harder and held it up, pointed towards her face. You may have fingers, I don't know how you managed that, but we both know what that saying means. You better prove to me real fast that you're actually Zoe, or I'm sticking this knife in your forehead. Zoe, or quite possibly the monster pretending to be Zoe, as I suspected, started laughing. Look, it could have been her, but I've been fooled by MJs plenty in the past, and I'd already seen evidence of monsters changing, so who's to say this wasn't an MJ that had evolved and gotten harder to recognize? Plus, I know Zoe. I know how she talks, how she thinks, And even if Zoe had gone outside at night, already unlikely, because Zoe's much smarter than I am, and even if she had gotten herself injured, she'd be thinking straight enough to get inside immediately, and to say something other than the hallmark phrase of an MJ. Can we all take a moment to appreciate the logic of my thought process at 2 a.m., and also to acknowledge that I have gotten a lot better about noticing potential traps? I'll take my applause now, thank you. Eli, don't be an idiot, possible Zoe said. That was a poor choice of words on my part. Sorry about that. But of course it's me. She raised a bloody hand and flipped me the bird again. See? I was definitely sure I saw something moving in the shadows now. Fuck. If I didn't make a decision in the next few seconds, I was toast. I glanced back at the house, nothing helpful there. I'd left Mr. Bailey inside, so he couldn't warn me. If this wasn't Zoe, the real Zoe was nowhere to be found, which would be a whole separate concern. It was up to me to make this choice on my own. So, I trusted my instincts. I looked back at the thing in front of me and decided it wasn't my girlfriend. Screw you, I said. Then I turned and jogged back to the front door, still gripping the knife tightly, half expecting something to jump on me from behind. The possible Zoe started screaming again as soon as I turned around, and kept screaming until I was safely inside, door shut behind me. She was yelling my name, cursing, shouting how she couldn't believe I didn't recognize my own girlfriend, crying. Which was only further proof that she wasn't Zoe. I got my validation only a few seconds later. Suddenly her one-person chorus went silent, and my blood turned to ice again. I could feel that I was being watched. I peered out the door's little peephole to see her standing right there, only a few feet from the door. She must have realized I was looking out, because suddenly her face was in front of the peephole, and with the light and shadows shifted the way they were, I could now see confirmation of my beliefs. Her eyes didn't have pupils. Guess they hadn't figured out a way to hide that feature yet. It raised its hand and wiggled its fingers. You've gotten smarter, it said, just loud enough for me to hear through the door. But we're improving, and we'll be back. Say hi to your girlfriend for us. Then, with a last creepy smile that I hoped never to see on Zoe's face ever again, it turned and walked away. Whatever had been moving in the shadows seemed to follow, as I saw a flash of dark movement head down the street beside MJ Zoe. I breathed a sigh of relief and slumped back against the door. I was proud of myself, honestly, for not falling for the MJ's trick, especially since the level of difficulty seemed to have ramped up. MJ's having fingers now could prove a real problem, especially if they brought their A-game and pulled the watch yourself murder your mom stunt. That still didn't answer the question of where the real Zoe was. I asked the few people awake if they'd seen her and they all said no. I was pleased to see that Oliver had drifted back to sleep with Mr. Bailey curled up on his chest. There's no blanket like a purring cat, am I right? Prickling with worry, I made my way back up the stairs. She was probably just on the computer, or in the bathroom, or something else totally normal, but what if she wasn't? What if she really had gone outside for some reason, and dash? Just as my thoughts were beginning to spiral in fear, the door at the end of the upstairs hallway opened, and there she was. I can't begin to describe to you the relief I felt upon seeing her, wearing an old t-shirt that went down to her knees, hair in a messy bun, eyes sleepy behind her glasses. And she looked as beautiful as she ever had, and she was here, and she was safe. I closed the distance between us in a few long strides and hugged her tight. She giggled and shoved me off. Why are you imitating a boa constrictor? I looked at her face, at her eyes, complete with pupils, and I instantly felt calmer. You didn't hear all that? She frowned and shook her head. I couldn't sleep, so I was in the office reading. I put in earplugs so your loud-ass snoring wouldn't bother me. What happened? She looked me up and down, and then her gaze found the knife. Eli, what's wrong? First of all, I do not snore, I said. She rolled her eyes. Second of all, MJs have fingers now. So that's fantastic. I led her back to the bedroom and told her everything. Ultimately, she admitted that she was proud of me, hell yeah, but agreed that this was a problem. Especially because the MJ who'd given us the note only a month ago had still definitely been fingerless. That means the monsters were being modified fast. And in dangerous ways. The Caleb had almost killed me based on laser colors, the Mike had almost killed us upon its collapse, and it hadn't spit anyone back out. Now MJs, if their only indicators were the words in their eyes, would be a lot harder to distinguish, especially when dealing with emotional traumas and for people who weren't as used to this as we were, aka everyone else. I got up and updated the rule right then. Because let's be honest, I wasn't getting right back to sleep after that anyway. Rule number 11, if you see a person you know, it's probably not that person. Always check their eyes, and never agree to take their hand. Addition, if you see yourself, just fucking leave. It's not worth the pain. So, there you have it. I think changing rule number 11 is the scariest one yet, because MJs are the freaking worst already, and now they're even more of a pain in the ass. And if you don't listen well enough, you're screwed. All they have to do is get someone not paying attention to take their hands, and it's over. Or someone emotionally traumatized, and God knows they're good at helping with that. It's also not good news that I've had to update 3 rules already. The monsters are being modified quickly, and overall it's been to make them less vulnerable and more threatening. It's hard to stay on your toes when you don't know what to look for. And it's dangerous not knowing what we might be up against the next time we face the same monster. We need to work together more than ever, because if I die, it better not be anticlimatically due to using the wrong fucking color of light. If I die, I want it to be in a blaze of glory. But I'd rather not die at all, so let's aim for that instead.